Our first presenter of the day, who is Dr. Kimberly D. McCorkle. She is a professor of legal studies and the vice provost at the University of West Florida. During her 15 years at UWF, she has served as an assistant and associate dean in the College of Education and Professional Studies, department chair, and academic affairs fellow. She graduated from Louisiana State University and the University of Florida College of Law. She completed the Management Development Program at the Harvard Institutes for Higher Education. She is a former state prosecutor and criminal defense attorney. Her primary research focus is intimate partner and family violence, and she is co-author of the SAGE textbook, American Homicide. Dr. McCorkle has published numerous articles and has presented and trained on domestic violence, crime, and intimate partner homicide. She is a member of the Florida Bar, Impact 100, the Florida Association of Women Lawyers, the National Homicide Research Working Group, the Southern Criminal Justice Association, and the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences. She has served as a member of the Board of Directors of Favor House of Northwest Florida, the local domestic violence shelter, for over 10 years. Dr. Kimberly McCorkle.
Turning on my microphone. Okay, can you hear me? Thank you, April, very much, and good morning, everybody. So I walked around, I see that most of you are sitting in the back, like in church, right? So I'm gonna make sure that I see you back there and that we can talk. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, very good. Well, I am so excited about being here. I'd like to thank Human Resources for putting this on and for inviting me to speak today. I was very honored to be able to be part of the program that Jamie described to you, which is about building, building a culture of respect, right? And they asked me specifically to speak on the subject of kind of leading by example, with the idea or the thought that respect in any organization kind of starts at the top, right? And so we're going to spend a little bit of time this morning kind of talking about that. But as I said, I'm happy to be part of a presentation or a day-long series of presentations that will be focused on topics that you hopefully can think about in your role at UWF, okay? And I'll start off by saying, as April just introduced me, you know about my background, I don't profess to be an expert in leadership, but like many of you, I have worked in leadership roles along the way throughout my career. My discipline is, the criminal world. I work, as April said, in kind of family violence, homicide, intimate partner homicide, those really kind of sad topics, right? But those are the areas that I usually present and train on. So this is a great opportunity to talk about something that I get to do a lot in my current role and in roles that I've had along the way. So when I talk about leadership today, I want to talk about things that you do as well in your work every day, because some of you, by your title, may not necessarily consider yourselves to be a leader, right? But I would submit to you that a lot of what you do every day involves leadership, whether your role is whether it's included in your official title or not. You lead teams, you lead projects, you lead search committees, right? You do a lot of leadership. And so hopefully what we'll talk about today will be valuable to you as you think about ways that you can take on leadership tasks and do it in a way that really helps your team move forward, right? Leadership is important. Why does it matter? Why is it so important? Well, it's important because it impacts the organization where we work in a really fundamental way. It makes a place either a great place to work or a workplace that's not so much fun for everybody to work in, right? So we all kind of know that leadership is really important. So today we're going to talk about how that happens, how it happens that kind of setting the example, if you're leading a project or leading in a role or leading in your department, how do you make your workplace a better place to be? How do you build a culture of respect? So let's get started. And I noticed there are a couple of tables that only have 2 people. So for this quick little exercise, maybe you guys could join together so that there's 4 of you. All right, so in front of your table, Tracy has put these out, and Labrada helped put these out, these little note cards, right? Here's what I hope we can do. Hopefully my clicker will work. Okay, maybe it's not. All right, I want you to take your note card, okay? We're going to do this relatively quickly, but it's kind of a cold morning and we need to get our brains engaged. I see it's up to 45 degrees already, so it's a heat wave already. I want you to think about the top 3 qualities of a good leader. The top 3, there are a lot, but try, in your opinion, what are the top 3 qualities that a good leader should have? And just write those down. And after you do that, you're actually going to share these with your table mates. And what I'm going to ask you to do at the table is to kind of tally up at your table really what the top 3 vote getters are. And then I'd like one person maybe to be willing to stand up from your table to share it out with the group. And we're going to do all of that in about 4 minutes, okay? All right. What are the top 3 qualities of a great leader? You guys, share with them. Once you're done.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and make sure I know how to operate that microphone. Yes.
Just started. It wasn't at first, but it is now. Thank you. Yeah, I had to make sure that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's on. Just let me know. Just hang out. Just whenever she starts back up again.
Okay, good. Were you able to read?
And it works out perfect.
All good? Okay.
Check one.
Okay, how's everybody doing? Looks like we have our lists together. Still voting? So you have your lists, and we're going to talk about those lists in just a second. And I would bet that the lists that you have tallied at your table of leadership experts would probably match what you would find in these leadership books and in many more, right? There are tons of books on leadership, and many of you who've progressed into leadership roles over the years have probably grab some of these books. It's kind of what we do, right? If you looked at my bedside table, you'd see a bunch of leadership books, and someone will recommend a book, and you'll read one on the airplane during one of your travels. So we've all amassed kind of some leadership thoughts and some leadership ideas about kind of what makes a good leader. So you see here some top books by authors that include John Maxwell. A lot of people have read John Maxwell, right? Probably, yeah, pretty good one. Stephen Covey, Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? You see the Peter Drucker book. We're going to talk about Drucker in a few minutes. I like Drucker a lot, pretty prolific writer. He's written over, I guess, close to 40 books on leadership. The Harvard Business Review's top 10 articles on leadership. Some of these might, again, kind of look familiar. We could certainly add a lot to the list. I was talking to someone just a couple of days who recommended 2 leadership books. I've already ordered them from Amazon, right? We like to read about leadership. So what do all the authors say? Well, they talk about, again, how important good leadership is. Leadership matters. We all know it. Some of us may even say, you know, we kind of know it when we see it, right? But I want to hear from you to hear what you came up with at your tables. So we have a microphone. Does anybody want to volunteer first to go first? Oh, we have somebody up front. See, it's always a table up front, right? They're ready. They're ready to share.
Okay, so I will hand that to you.
Yes, we hadn't vetted these for the top 3, but each one of them will be weighted according to what type of leadership role the person is in.
Great.
And one says they have to be respectful.
Yes.
They have to be a good listener, and they have to have a good attitude, positivity.
Great.
Okay?
Yep.
And then the next one says they have to have good interpersonal and communication skills. They have to have vision,
Yep.
organizational skills, and another respect. They must be lead by example.
Yep.
And it must be fair to all.
Fair.
And they must have integrity.
Integrity.
Big time.
Yes.
In any role. Empathy and respect again.
Wow.
Respect came up a whole lot.
Respect came up a lot
Yes,
of
ma'am.
respect. Great.
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent. Thank you. Who else? We have one here.
I think this is going to be very repetitive, but we combined all of ours and we got communication as a major skill, encouraging and supportive and inclusive.
Great. Yeah.
We also had ethical and other things too, but
Yeah.
that
So
was the 3.
communication, really important. We're going to talk about communication throughout the day. Thank you, Sharon. We have another? Good. Stephanie? Oh, okay.
You've been voluntold.
So we, like the other groups, we had an effective communicator and listener, so it goes both ways.
Yeah.
We also thought integrity was very important, and the ability to move a team forward to reach goals. So knowing the strengths and weaknesses of the team and being able to utilize that to move forward.
Awesome. Great. All important. How about somebody from the back? We see you back there. Okay, there's a couple of tables. Thank you. Yeah.
Our cute little group came up with these 3 skills, and I thought we were pretty well-rounded. We kind of came up with the same skills. They must be empathetic. They must have empathy towards their group.
Yep.
They must be respectful. That's one that came up. I think most of us had thoughtful, respectful. They kind of go hand in hand. And they must be decisive, and they must know
Decisive.
where
Yes.
if they don't know something, like where to get the information, not just come up with, oh, I just don't know.
Right.
They must know how to get an answer, and if not right away, you know.
Great. Yeah, we're going to talk more about that later too. Thank you. Who else in the back? Maybe 2 more tables, possibly.
All right.
We think a good leader should be supportive, open to discussion and new ideas, and inspires and motivates.
Great. Great list. Somebody else in the back?
Hi, we also had respect, communication, but also honesty. You
Honesty.
need someone that's going to give you good feedback in a positive way, and we think that's important.
Excellent. Does anybody else in the back 2 tables, would you like to share? We still have time. Yeah.
So we had the same as others, communication, supportive, and then we also had empowering and motivating.
Great. Yes. Very good. Empowering, motivating. Okay. Anybody, Danny from your table? Y'all want to share? Okay, yeah.
I'm all the way back here.
So I get credit for this, even though it's the same list as everybody else's, but we have communication and we have listening was very important and consistent among all of our lists. And then we kind of grouped empathy, respect, and understanding all into the same category.
Okay.
Just so we could all get credit.
Everybody gets credit. Good. Good.
List of five.
Well, thank you. That was great. And by the way, you guys did very well on the test, right? Because as I mentioned, a lot of leadership literature out there that talks about kind of what qualities make a great leader. Has anybody read this book, Leadership Secrets of Attila the Hun? You have? Jennifer? Good, yeah. So it's a fun book. I read it a couple of years ago when it was recommended to me. It's metaphorical. The author here picks a real leader, but some of this is really just kind of by way of being able to make good stories. He suggests traits that make a great leader, and he uses the metaphorical example of Attila the Hun, who was a controversial figure in history. He was quite brutal, but he was an effective leader in kind of leading his troops into battle, into a lot of battle victories. But the author here, Wes Roberts, uses this as an example of, kind of qualities that make great leaders. And again, a lot of this is kind of what you guys were talking about. He makes the point here, because he specifically also mentions emotional and physical stamina, right? Because the point he makes is that leadership can be hard, and it can be physically hard, it can be emotionally hard, it can take a lot of work if done well, right? I'm reminded, I think Dr. Saunders just wrote a piece recently where she talked about kind of the physical requirements of being a leader, because you actually, in her role, she meets with a lot of people, she talks with a lot of people, she's physically moving a lot, right? So physical stamina is important. Courage and desire are important. One of the points in this book is that if you're going to be a good leader, you need to want to be a good leader. And so your courage and your desire to be in the role is extremely important. I was really happy, somebody I think in this middle table mentioned decisiveness, right? Decisiveness is extremely important quality in a leader. Someone who can make decisions. He, in this book, says you want someone who doesn't vacillate or procrastinate too much, right? That is, a leader may not have an immediate decision, but he or she can make a decision in a relatively timely fashion so that the people who are working with the leader can move forward. That's extremely important. What else? Self-confidence. Your confidence inspires confidence in your team, right? You have to be confident that you sort of know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, you learn what you need to know so that you can be an effective leader, but self-confidence is important. Accountability. You're accountable to the people who work with you. You're accountable to the organization. Responsibility. Credibility. I heard a lot of you kind of talk about credibility. When we talk about credibility, we talk about someone who is believable, who says what he or she thinks and follows through, and is someone who inspires trust among the people who work with him or her, that you're trustworthy. I read a book recently that's called Dare to Lead. I actually just started reading it, and so I'm about halfway through. We could spend the whole hour just talking about what's in that book. Has anybody read Dare to Lead? Yeah? Oh, good. It's good, isn't it? Yeah, someone suggested it'd be great for a book club. So we might talk about, because there's some really good stuff in there, and she's written a lot of things, right? But what she says in Dare to Lead about the issue related to credibility is leaders should avoid what she calls the dirty yes. Does anybody know what that is? It's basically saying yes in person, but then saying no behind the person's back, right? So again, it all goes to being someone who says things that you can trust and that you know that that person is trustworthy, okay? Stewardship. Stewardship is all about keeping the resources of the organization in mind, being a good steward of the organization's resources, helping everyone kind of know what the mission of the organization is, and helping move the team forward. And then a little bit of competitiveness might not hurt, right? Someone who likes to be successful. So what do you think? Good list? Similar to your list? Yeah. There are certainly others. I like this list because this is kind of a more modern view in some of the leadership literature about kind of what makes people good leaders, right? The self-control one, really important, right? That a leader has the ability to kind of be measured in public meetings and public spaces, not to be sort of hot-headed, that kind of thing. Open-minded. The third one's important. Consider equity. When we talk about equity, we talk about principles of fairness. Are you fair in your decisions, right? Fairness is extremely important for the team to know kind of what the leader's values are. And we're going to talk more about that as we go along today as well. I think it's really important, these two here, that you want others on your team to succeed and that you're dedicated to the success of people who are on your team. There are lots of ways that good leaders can do that, right? I think we do that pretty well in the university setting where we encourage people to have development opportunities, professional development opportunities. We talk to people about kind of what's next in your career path, right? We help people to know that we want them to succeed and we want to help them kind of get there. Good leaders develop new leaders all the time, right? That's extremely important for good leaders. They share graciously. That is, they share the credit for the wins of the team. They share with their team, and they don't take all the credit when things go well, and they also take the responsibility when things don't go well, right? Okay, what else? Well, there's some other perspective on leadership, and I thought you might like to see this.
Well, I think to be a good leader, you have to be responsible and try to lead the group well. Well, I think a leader has to have an open mind, always has to be able to absorb new ideas.
I think of a person who knows what he's doing.
Or she.
Or she.
If he or she says they'll do something, they'll do it. If someone thinks up want to build a clubhouse, right, and they think they can do it, try to help them. Encourage with imagination, because if someone says, I'm going to build a sandcastle, and you say, oh, that could be really big and wonderful, and that might be even as big as the whole beach, that would make them feel better, and that would make them know that they can do it. And show the people the right ways, and lead them if they're new to the school or something. I will probably choose a person who will not be mean. I think they should take time off to at least listen to the people that they're leading over. Well, it's sort of like an honor to be like a leader, because it sort of means that you're pretty important. I think the hardest thing is having an open mind, being encouraging, and being a little bit strict. I think that's a very odd mixture. I think a leader should be willing to let other people have a chance too, and not just saying, well, do it this way, do it that way. There will be a certain person that if they're picked to be leader, I feel like, oh, not them again. You don't want to say, hey, look, you're not doing a great job. You want to say something kind or something.
If you see somebody really working hard, you should compliment them.
If someone's not doing too well, it's not really too good if you just tell them that they're doing great and they're being perfect. You want to encourage them, but not lie to them.
Be respecting. Be truthful. Be patient. If somebody makes a mistake and it's like, okay, all right, that's just one mistake. Everybody makes mistakes. Just go on. You can do it. If they have really good behavior, you could give them a raise in salary or something like that. You need to keep it very good so that it'll be all very easy. I think when people help other people, I think they get a little good feeling inside. And I don't know what that's called, but it's just something that lifts you.
Oh, right? We could just stop right there, right? Whenever I came across that, I thought, wow, they just said it all, and they reflected really kind of what you guys have all said. A couple of things to emphasize: do what you say, don't be mean, be kind, be truthful, give them a raise, right? Help others, and let others speak. Right? So really some good kind of words of wisdom. And again, I would submit that many of the things that they talked about are examples of this idea of kind of leading by example, right? How to set a good example, a good tone for your team. This is, again, kind of another example, and it covers a lot of the traits that we've already talked about so far, but I did want to point out a couple that are mentioned here, and this is what some of you said earlier: communication, right? That communication, strong communication, is extremely important. The book that we were talking about a moment ago, called Dare to Lead, has a very pithy little quote that says, "Clear is kind," right? Being clear and what the objectives are, that helps your team, right? So communication is essential, and we all struggle to kind of be better communicators. It's kind of a work in progress, but communication is extremely important. I'll also point out here the concept of transparency, right? Is transparency important in a leadership role? I think that it really is. It really helps to, again, create an atmosphere of honesty and of shared purpose, right? That we're all kind of working towards this goal together, and you're very clear if you're serving on a team about kind of what the expectations are, what the process is, right? So transparency is an extremely important piece. And then empathy. Some of you mentioned empathy, right? Empathy, extremely important. Many experts in leadership say that empathy is probably one of the most important traits that a good leader could have, right? That's the ability really to consider the thoughts and feelings of other people and to be empathetic and to understand that your role as a leader is to consider where your team is, right? And to help and know how to move people forward in the right way. Any thoughts about this one? Continuous learning, I think that's important. I think, again, in higher ed, we do that pretty well, kind of in our leadership roles, but you recognize that if you're in a leadership role, you need to be dedicated to continuously learning about your job, about how you can do it better, about your industry, right? Any thoughts? Okay. So it's funny, I know Sheryl Sandberg and Facebook have been in the news in the last couple of days. I was thinking, should I take this Sheryl Sandberg slide out of the presentation? She's the COO at Facebook, right? And she wrote a book a couple of years ago called Lean In. I know some of you read it. We actually had some discussions on campus about Lean In, right? So it was about developing women leaders. That was really kind of the purpose of her book. But what I like about this particular quote that she talks about in the book is the part in the last sentence there, right? That leaders should strive for authenticity over perfection, right? Being authentic is important because it helps your team kind of relate to you. And I think authenticity is important. And I think it's also important to say that sometimes as leaders, we're not perfect, and that's okay, right? But if you all share the right mission, if the leader is there with you kind of working towards a common goal, then we can forgive a little bit of imperfection in our leaders, right? As long as we know that they are doing other things well and kind of moving us forward. Okay, so now that we have talked a bit about the traits of some good leaders, I want to shift to kind of talking about some actions, right? Because I think actions are really important. There are lots of definitions of leadership. I didn't start with the definition because I wanted us to kind of think about qualities first, but there are a lot of ways that we kind of define leadership. I like this definition because it's pretty short and clear, and I think, kind of inclusive. So it's a process where a person influences another group to achieve a common goal. And I think that's really the key part, that as a leader, if you are leading a project, what you are doing is you're trying to move people, a group of people, towards achieving a common goal, okay? So if you think about your role, think about the role of people who you work with, think about the goal. And I like to start kind of here as I think about my role and prior roles that I've had at the university, right? What are we all here at UWF to do, right? Do you think about that sometimes, kind of maybe every day or every week or something, right? Because regardless of the role you play at the university, I would submit to you that we're all focused in some ways on this, right? Even if you don't pull it out and kind of look at it every single day. But we're focused on our mission and our vision. And I always like to hear Dr. Ellenberg talk about this because he says, you know, higher education is a very special place to work, and it really is. I feel lucky every single day to get to work in higher education because this is what we're working towards, right? Not many people in many industries get to say that this is what you're working towards. I'm working towards making a better society by creating people who are going to contribute to their professions and to society. People who are going to be big thinkers and who are going to change the world. Isn't that a lofty, noble mission that we all share? It's incredible if you think about it. I mean, it's wonderful to work in private industries. Whenever you read leadership books, sometimes they're talking about how you sell a better car, how you sell a better product. That's important too, but look what we get to do, right? We get to help educate the next generation of big thinkers. And the reason that I put this here is because in a lot of the leadership literature, it says this: if you're going to be a good leader, you have to believe in the mission of your organization, right? You have to be mission driven if you're going to be a good leader. So think about that when you're asked to take on a leadership role, maybe in your current role, if you're asked to take on something else next week, think about what the mission is and how you can inspire people towards this mission. And again, I will say what's good about where we are is that I think it's pretty easy to inspire people towards a mission that is this exciting, right? If you've studied leadership, you know there are a bunch of theories about it. We've been talking a little bit about kind of the trait theory. There was an older concept called the great man theory that early theorists kind of said you're either born to be a leader or you're not. And as leadership theories have developed, there's really more of a focus on kind of behavioral theories, and that's what we're going to spend some time talking about today. And that is that a lot of writers have said, you know, you can develop leadership qualities. You don't have to be born a great leader. We can teach people how to be good leaders by teaching them the right actions to employ in their organizations. These are some kind of leadership styles that people talk about, that there are different styles of leadership. What I'll say again, without spending kind of too much time on this kind of detail, but what you'll know by reading some leadership literature is that some duties, some things that you do, some projects might require a different style. So if you're a leader, you typically aren't just one of these kinds of leaders. You might be in one instance a democratic leader where you're participatory, where you involve people, but other decisions might be a bit more autocratic because they have to be, because it's about moving quickly or kind of making decisions about someone's personal safety, right? So our leadership styles differ sometimes depending on the task. But as I said to you, I want to talk and spend the next few minutes talking about kind of specific behaviors. I mentioned Peter Drucker earlier. Has anybody read anything from Peter Drucker? Yeah, he wrote lots of books, I think close to 40 different books. And one of the things that he does, he talks about behavioral theories. Again, he says leaders aren't born, leaders can be made. And that's important for an organization to know because that means you can develop people to be good leaders by teaching them what good leaders should do, right? And so he has, in this short article that he wrote on effective leaders that came from one of his longer books, he basically comes up with kind of 8 practices that good leaders should participate in order to be effective, all right? So I wanted to spend a little bit of time kind of talking about some of these. The first kind of very practical piece is to start with the question, what needs to be done? And then the quick follow-up question to that is, what is right for the enterprise? Okay? So the what needs to be done question, as he talks about it, good leaders should be very clear about setting priorities, right? Whenever you come to a new task, Sometimes it might be overwhelming to kind of take on a leadership role because you're trying to figure out what are the many things that need to be done. But as a good leader, what you know is that you can't do all of them all at once, right? We all know some people who might try to do that, and it might be effective, but a lot of people who've really spent some time thinking about this say that in order to be really effective, it's better for leaders to prioritize a couple of things, right? And so when you ask the question, what needs to be done, that takes some time. That takes talking to people. That takes understanding what the demands are, what the organization's mission is, like we were talking about earlier. But ask the question, what needs to be done, and then let that guide your work. Prioritize, right? The follow-on question to that is, and it's connected to the first one, but what is right for the enterprise? Again, what's the mission? How are we going to get there? What things do we need to do to get there? After the leader has kind of identified that, the idea then is to think about action plans. And I think action plans are important. For some people, they're very specific and written down. For others, it may be kind of, jotted down kind of plans or whatever. But Drucker's point is that if you develop action plans, that's extremely important because you can share those with the team, right? Here's what the action plan looks like for us to achieve this goal. Here's the timeline. Timeline's a really important part of an action plan. Here's how long it's going to take us to get there. But he also says action plans should be flexible. You should have the ability to kind of refine it as you move along. Maybe you think you can get a project done in 6 months, a really big project, but maybe it takes longer, right? So be willing to revise your action plan as you move along, right? Action plans should also talk about kind of who's going to take on which piece of that. So when you develop an action plan, talk about who's going to take the lead on it in your team and be clear about that. Share that. Good leaders also take responsibility for decisions. They're specific when they decide who's going to do what, right? What Drucker talks about here is that sometimes you may find that you've assigned someone something to do that maybe he or she is not the best person suited to do that. And so a good leader can see that and knows that and might make decisions to shift that person onto a different project that he or she might excel in, right? We all know if you've worked with people before, there are certain things that some people are really good at and other things that others are better at. So a good leader takes responsibility and says, I may have assigned you to do this, but now I'm going to ask you to do this, and we'll have this person take this on, okay? And that's about kind of taking responsibility. Somebody said earlier, giving good feedback. The feedback is important in this part of it, right? What else? The communication bit, again. Good leaders communicate. So specifically here, communicate your action plan. Talk about who will carry out the tasks, what's the deadline, who are the people who are going to be affected by this. Make sure you've kept them in the loop. And then who are the people who just need to know about it? Maybe they're not directly impacted, but they need to know. That communication piece, I think everybody who takes on a leadership role, you struggle with that, right? We're always kind of learning how to be better communicators. And maybe you've learned from a prior project about things you can do better the next time about communicating. You say, oh, well, maybe I didn't tell everybody about that. Maybe I need to tell more people about that. Drucker makes the point that communication, especially communicating big plans, that's so essential for a good leader. If you think you've told everybody, you might want to make sure you've told them again, right? And we know that, I think, by working in a big organization, that sometimes you think that everybody knows, but maybe they don't. And so communication is about making sure that you've informed people, especially if they're going to be impacted by a change. Focus on opportunities rather than problems. Drucker says here that it's certainly important as a leader of an organization to solve problems. We all know there are problems that exist that you have to address in your role. But what he says is that leadership, when you're focusing in a management meeting or when you're focusing on kind of moving the organization forward, it's better to spend more of your time on focusing on the opportunities and addressing the problems, but addressing those as a secondary part of it, right? So it's more about being kind of focused on moving forward. And focusing on opportunities really is essential for a good leader to kind of have the big picture. He gives an example of in Japanese industries, for example. He studies a lot about kind of Japanese industries that have been very successful in the business realm. But he says that in Japanese industries, what many leaders do is that they focus their top people on the opportunities. And then the people who are maybe newer to the organization handle the problems. And I thought about that a lot as I was getting ready for this, and I thought, well, I handle problems sometimes, so I'm not sure what that means about the leaders who assign me kind of handling problems. But handling problems is important, but the idea here is that most of your leadership focus should be on how do we continue moving forward. Does that make sense? Okay. Do you love number 7? We spend a lot of our times in meetings, don't we? Yeah, we all do. Whether you're leading it or whether you're a team member, good leaders run productive meetings. They realize that meetings need to be efficient because efficient meetings mean that you value the time of everybody who works with you, right? You're not going to waste people's time in a meeting that's not productive. So running a productive meeting means determining what kind of meeting it is, what the format needs to be, because meetings differ in terms of what you need to accomplish in a meeting, right? But if you're running the meeting, go into it prepared to know exactly what needs to be covered in that meeting, be very clear about it, and then stay on task, right? I love one of the most important things he says about productive meetings is if you're running a meeting and you kind of talk about whatever the business of the day is, don't then add something at the end of the meeting that has nothing to do with what you're there to talk about, right? You might want to, but it's not respectful of your team's time if you do that. So run productive meetings. The other important quality action that leaders should take is they say we rather than I, right? Again, back to that kind of taking responsibility, being accountable, giving credit to your team. But good leaders think and say we rather than I. They're always thinking about the we, the organization, and not just about themselves individually, okay? So that's extremely important. And then he says, so those are the 8 practices, but then there's one other kind of rule that leaders should think about in all things they do. He talks a lot about the fact that leaders really should listen more and talk less. And so he says one of the ways you can do that is by doing this. Okay? Yeah. So when you come in, don't pretend that you know all the answers. Listen to your team, and you might learn a lot by doing that. How are we doing on time? We're okay? Y'all give me a signal. Okay. All right. We've talked a lot about teams today, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, but what we know is that teams are extremely important for any enterprise. I think especially, again, in higher education, we really have a team approach. But whenever you have teams, effective teams can do a lot together, right? They can be more productive. They can generate lots of creative ideas, better quality products, lots of innovation and creativity when you have a lot of people together talking about things. So team leadership is really extremely important. And developing skills, as I was talking about at the beginning of this morning's session, on how you lead a team, it's extremely important because I realize that probably most of you in this room will serve in some capacity as leading a team, right? But I want to shift a little bit to another book that is specific to the topic of leading by example. In fact, the name of the book by John Baldoni is 50 Ways Great Leaders Inspire Results. And it's lead by example and then 50 Ways Great Leaders Inspire Results. Baldoni really kind of said that in order for a good leader to be effective and to be valued by his or her team, a good leader needs to go beyond just some of the things we were talking about before, right? By just kind of being efficient and running productive meetings. He starts with the C word, right? Character. Do you think this is important? That good leaders have character? Yeah, again, I think you would find, and you probably have if you've read some of this, that if a good leader demonstrates character in all things he or she says or does, that it really kind of forms the foundation for everything that that person does and for helping the organization move forward, okay? So character is essential. And, you know, I think we all know that if you've been led by someone who has good character, you feel inspired, don't you, to kind of follow that person and to do wherever that person is leading, you're ready to go, right? Because you believe in the person. And again, if that person makes mistakes, you're willing to kind of forgive those mistakes because you believe in that person's character and where the person is leading you. Be accountable for your actions and responsible for the actions of others. We've talked about that a lot already this morning. Another way that you kind of lead by example is kind of the big ego. Some people might have egos, whether they're in a leadership role or not, right? But it's important for leaders who lead by example to kind of check the ego at the door. And again, to put the benefit or the mission of the enterprise ahead of his or her own personal interests. I like the one at the top regarding resilience. That's really important, that someone who leads a group says to the group, it's okay if you get knocked down, right? We all do. We all make mistakes. We have an idea that we think is going to be perfect, and then it doesn't work out for whatever reason. That's okay. I'm just glad you had that great idea and we tried it, right? So let's think about the next idea and let's move forward on that, right? Promoting resilience in an organization is an extremely important part of a person who kind of leads by example. A person who leads by example may also share examples of past failures that that person has had, right? Let me tell you about a project that I tried a couple years ago. Thought it was going to be great, but it really was a disaster, right? And here's how we got past it. That part is extremely important for leaders to kind of share that with the team, to say, we're not always going to have the perfect idea or project, but we're going to know how to move forward as a group, right? Resiliency, extremely important. I like the second one as well. Create a culture where people can ask questions. Don't you want that? Yeah, good leaders promote that. And again, I'll go back to the higher ed example. We generally know that if you're going to be in a room with really smart people, always, in every place you go on campus and you have a group like this, there are going to be some really smart people, a lot of people who are way smarter than you are, right? Create a place where they can ask you and ask questions of each other, ask questions of the leader, right? A person who doesn't open that space, who doesn't open the opportunity for asking questions, really might get stuck. I'll talk about that in a sec. Manage around obstacles. That's extremely important. You know that there are going to be obstacles, there are going to be challenges, but you have to be prepared to kind of move forward, acknowledge them and move on. Sometimes there are things that we don't anticipate, and that's okay. And it goes back to kind of telling your team, we're going to move past this together. Management is the discipline of detail, whereas leadership is the art of thinking beyond the details. And I think in order to make things better. Drive innovation by encouraging people to act and think creatively, right? As we were talking about before, you want to encourage your team to kind of think of ideas or thoughts that no one else has discussed before. Let's put everything on the table. Let's talk about it. Again, give people the opportunity to have the space to be able to talk about those kinds of things. Encouraging dissent about issues, but civility around people. A leader who leads by example. I think Jamie listed some traits or some rules at the beginning of your speech, of your welcome remarks, and I was thinking about this. We can disagree about issues. We should. If we're going to be a healthy organization, if we're going to have a project that's successful, we're going to have some disagreement because there are a bunch of really smart people who are talking about it. But it's not okay for those kinds of discussions to become uncivil. Right? And so civility about people is extremely important. And a good leader kind of models that behavior by setting the expectation in the group, right? And so that part is extremely important. create a winning culture so people are confident, know that change is going to happen and be ready for that, anticipate it. The top bullet's really important there. As I said, you're going to work with a lot of really smart people, which is great. Teach them how to do their jobs, but then get out of their way, right? Don't micromanage. That part is really important. I love one of the quotes from Howard Schultz, who founded Starbucks, right? He said, early on, I realized that I had to hire people smarter and more qualified than I was in a number of different fields. And I had to let go of a lot of decision making. I can't tell you how hard that is. But if you've imprinted your values on the people around you, you can dare to trust them to make the right moves, right? Hire smart people and then let them do their work. That's a trait of a really important, a really good leader, a strong leader who kind of leads by example. Get off the pedestal. Leadership is not just about kind of who you are, but it's about what you do and how you do your work. And the last one, important for everybody, right? Lighten up, take the work seriously, but maybe not yourself so much. What do you think? Yeah? Do you know some people who do some of these things, I hope? Do you do some of these things in your roles? I know you do. I see many of you in the room who I know you do a lot of these things. All right. What about transformational leaders? Well, transformational leaders, it's a discussion that comes up a lot. People talk about, well, you're going to be a transformational leader. A lot of the leadership literature says that's a pretty high goal. If you're going to be transformative, it means you are really changing the culture. And when you do that, I think it encompasses kind of what we were talking about already, which is some of the actions we've talked about being a really inspiring leader. But you inspire your team, you develop your team, that is, you develop future leaders, you engage them, you challenge them by setting the bar really high, talking about your expectations, and then you align the team to kind of what the mission is. You're always focused on the mission of the organization, right? And so transformational leadership, it's important. I think it's something that people aspire to make their organizations great places to work. And so it's important to kind of keep that in mind. I know I'm almost out of time, so I'm going to end with something that I thought you might like. It takes a couple of minutes, but when I was looking for some examples of leadership, you guys have probably all watched a bunch of TED Talks, right? Well, one of the common TED Talks that is recommended the most for leadership relates to this topic that's called everyday leadership, right? And I'd never really heard about kind of what everyday leadership is. Well, you're going to hear more about it in a second, but everyday leaders are people who don't realize that really in their role in almost any organization, we all have the opportunity to kind of lead in some way. And so this talk says that you want to think about that, be mindful of that, that when you represent an organization, you have the opportunity a lot to make positive influences on others. And it doesn't require that you have a particular title, but it means that every single day we might be involved in kind of having a role in leadership. So we'll take a look at this and then I'll save some time for some questions at the end. Maybe. Oh, nope.
See, I've asked that question all the way across the country, and everywhere I ask it, no matter where, there's always a huge portion of the audience that won't put up their hand. And I've come to realize that we have made leadership into something bigger than us. We made it into something beyond us. We made it about changing the world. And we've taken this title of leader and we treat it as if it's something that one day we're going to deserve. But to give it to ourselves right now means a level of arrogance or cockiness that we're not comfortable with. And I worry sometimes that we spend so much time celebrating amazing things that hardly anybody can do, that we've convinced ourselves that those are the only things we're celebrating. And we start to devalue the things that we can do every day. And we start to take moments where we truly are a leader, and we don't let ourselves take credit for it, and we don't let ourselves feel good about it. And I've been lucky enough over the last 10 years to work with some amazing people who have helped me redefine leadership in a way that I think has made me happier. And with my short time today, I just want to share with you the one story that is probably most responsible for that redefinition. I went to a school in a little school called Mount Allison University in Sackville, New Brunswick. And on my last day there, a girl came up to me and she said, "I remember the first time that I met you." And then she told me a story that happened 4 years earlier. She said, "On my day before I started university, I was in the hotel room with my mom and my dad, and I was so scared and so convinced that I couldn't do this, that I wasn't ready for university, that I just burst into tears. And my mom and my dad were amazing. They were like, 'Look, we know you're scared, but let's just go tomorrow. Let's go to the first day. And if at any point you feel as if you can't do this, that's fine. Just tell us, we will take you home. We love you no matter what.'" And she says, so I went the next day and I was standing in line getting ready for registration, and I looked around and I just knew I couldn't do it. I knew I wasn't ready. I knew I had to quit. And she says, I made that decision, and as soon as I made it, there was this incredible feeling of peace that came over me. And I turned to my mom and my dad to tell them that we needed to go home. And just at that moment, you came out of the Student Union building wearing the stupidest hat I have ever seen in my life. It was awesome. And you had a big sign promoting Shinorama, which is Students Fighting Cystic Fibrosis, a charity I've worked with for years. And you had a bucket full of lollipops. And you were walking along and you were handing the lollipops out to people in line and talking about Shinorama. And all of a sudden, you got to me and you just stopped and you stared. It was creepy. This girl right here knows exactly what I'm talking about. And then you looked at the guy next to me and you smiled and you reached in your bucket, you pulled out a lollipop and you held it out to him. And you said, "You need to give a lollipop to the beautiful woman standing next to you." And she said, "I have never seen anyone get more embarrassed faster in my life." He turned beet red and he wouldn't even look at me. He just kind of held the lollipop out like this. And I felt so bad for this dude that I took the lollipop. And as soon as I did, you got this incredibly severe look on your face and you looked at my mom and my dad and you said, "Look at that. Look at that. First day away from home, and already she's taking candy from a stranger." And she said everybody lost it. 20 feet in every direction, everyone started to howl. And I know this is cheesy, and I don't know why I'm telling you this, but in that moment when everyone was laughing, I knew that I shouldn't quit. I knew that I was where I was supposed to be, and I knew that I was home. And I haven't spoken to you once in the 4 years since that day, but I heard that you were leaving. And I had to come up and tell you that you've been an incredibly important person in my life, and I'm going to miss you. Good luck. And she walks away, and I'm flattened. And she gets about 6 feet away, she turns around and smiles and goes, "You should probably know this too. I'm still dating that guy 4 years later." A year and a half after I moved to Toronto, I got an invitation to their wedding. Here's the kicker. I don't remember that. I have no recollection of that moment, and I've searched my memory banks because that is funny, and I should remember doing it, and I don't remember it. And that was such an eye-opening, transformative moment for me to think that maybe the biggest impact I'd ever had on anyone's life, a moment that had a woman walk up to a stranger 4 years later and say, "You've been an incredibly important person in my life," was a moment that I didn't even remember. How many of you guys have a lollipop moment, a moment where someone said something or did something that you feel fundamentally made your life better? All right. How many of you have told that person they did it? See, why not? We celebrate birthdays where all you have to do is not die for 365 days. And yet we let people who have made our lives better walk around without knowing it. And every single one of you has been the catalyst for a lollipop moment. You have made someone's life better by something that you said or that you did. And if you think you haven't, think about all the hands that didn't go back up when I asked that question. You're just one of the people who hasn't been told. But it is so scary to think of ourselves as that powerful. It can be frightening to think that we can matter that much to other people. Because as long as we make leadership something bigger than us, as long as we keep leadership something beyond us, as long as we make it about changing the world, we give ourselves an excuse not to expect it every day from ourselves and from each other. Marianne Williamson said, "Our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our greatest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light and not our darkness that frightens us." And my call to action today is that we need to get over that. We need to get over our fear of how extraordinarily powerful we can be in each other's lives. We need to get over it so we can move beyond it. And our little brothers and our little sisters, and one day our kids, or our kids right now, can watch us start to value the impact we can have on each other's lives more than money and power and titles and influence. We need to redefine leadership as being about lollipop moments. How many of them we create, how many of them we acknowledge, how many of them we pay forward, and how many of them we say thank you for. Because we've made leadership about changing the world, and there is no world. There's only 6 billion understandings of it. And if you change one person's understanding of it, one person's understanding of what they're capable of, one person's understanding of how much people care about them, one person's understanding of how powerful an agent for change they can be in this world, you change the whole thing. And if we can understand leadership like that, I think if we can redefine leadership like that, I think we can change everything. And it's a simple idea, but I don't think it's a small one. And I want to thank you all so much for letting me share it with you.
So you all have lollipops at your table, right? For your lollipop moment. Maybe you can share with somebody a positive influence that they had on you without even knowing it. And I think that at a university, you probably have had a bunch of those, and you've probably been the person who's done that for a lot of people, like he did with the student who was on his campus, right? So thank you all very much. I would like to open up for questions. I think we might have a minute or two if there are any questions, about 5 minutes if there are any questions or comments or thoughts that you have about leadership, great or small, everyday leadership. And so I will say, I heard April say, oh, there's a comment, but she's going to give away some prizes. One of the things that you might get a chance to win is a copy of Attila the Hun, because I brought a copy to give away. Yes.
It's more of a comment than anything else, an observation that the majority of the people in this room are already the leaders. Yeah. They already know this. And it's the people that aren't here that should be seeing this.
Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, there's one.
All right, great. Good morning.
I kind of agree with what Sharon said, but in a little bit different context. You know, those that are leaders, everyday leaders, we are actively engaged without even thinking about it. So it's hard for us to watch other leaders who might not have that accountability. So I guess I have a question more so with accountability and how you hold those who should be responsible more to acknowledge that accountability for themselves. So.
Yeah, it's a great question. How do you work to make sure that people who are in leadership roles are accountable? I'd say the communication piece there is important as well. Feedback goes both ways. Leaders give feedback, but I think team members should also have the ability to give feedback to their leaders. Some leaders might ask for it, others might not, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't give it in a way that is helpful, that's not personal, that's objective. So I think it can be hard to kind of, there's some talk in the leadership literature about managing up, right? How do you kind of manage the person who's your leader? And there are a lot of, I think, suggestions about kind of how to do that, but it can be tricky. But I think it's important that if you believe someone is not kind of being accountable, that you have the ability to be able to share that with the person, if you can, to find a way to be able to do it. And again, I'm not minimizing how challenging that might be, but to think of a way to try to communicate that, again, for the benefit of the organization. Yeah. Anybody else have thoughts about that? There might be some other wisdom. Anybody have thoughts about how you would work on accountability? Okay. Maybe give them a lollipop too. Yeah. Okay, should we auction off a book then? All right. There's April. Thank you all very much. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you.